Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Okay, so now we are on our next subject. We finished the big subject of evaluation. So right at the beginning of this course, we talked about what is HRM, and we said that it is 8 things, right? And there's a core of 5, and that was recruitment, selection, training, evaluating, and compensating. So now we finished recruitment, selection, training, evaluation, and we are at our last one, which is compensating. So in your American Management Association book, this is chapter 5, compensation. In your Dessler textbook, this is chapter 8. Now, there's one difference in this subject between the Dessler and the American Management Association, which is Dessler has one long chapter about this, chapter 8. And I'm using, as you can see in the slide, I use this book for the course. And then I supplement it with the American Management Association. This chapter in Dessler has 2 parts, really, or I separate it into 2 parts, and so does the American Management Association. And the first part is compensation, and the second part is benefits and incentives. So the first part, which is compensation in chapter 5 of the American Management Association, that has to do with payment in its various forms. Payment doesn't just need to be cash or money. But then there's also benefits and compensation, benefits and incentives, which is kind of a different part. So we'll cover that in what I call 8A. Excuse me, while I enjoy my delicious decaf coffee. Okay, so no presentations, do Carter Clean Company in class, talk about that in class, Let's go right to what is compensation. So as I just said, compensation is not only money. It's anything that you get from working that is valuable. So I don't care if you sort of memorize my definition or you just say it that way. It's anything you get. It's anything you get that is some sort of payment. Oh, no, I want highlighter. Anything you get that's some sort of payment or a reward for working, right? It has to be based on work. It can't be based on nothing. That's not compensation. That is a gift. So what we're talking about in this section is a compensation program, and that involves salaries. That's the first thing we'll talk about. Excludes benefits, because that's the next section, and other perquisites like vacation time. So really, in this compensation program, we're talking about salaries, right? And salary obviously should reflect either what people do or their level of responsibility. You know, a lot of times people say, well, it's crazy that a CEO can make so much more than, you know, a lower level employee. And it is crazy. I mean, there's lots of studies, I think I have them more in organizational behavior class, that talk about just how much money CEOs make compared to the low level of employees. Maybe I have it in this one too. But either way, it's absolutely crazy and much more than most people would guess if they haven't studied it. The average guess when someone says in a survey, in your opinion, the top paid executive, how many times the low paid executive, their salary is how many times the low paid executive? And most people guess about 15 times the salary of a entry level executive, or 20. And it's something insane in America. It's like 148 times the amount of money. And, you know, it's crazy. But the argument for that is, which I don't necessarily believe, but the argument is that it's not that they have a lot more duties or that their job is harder necessarily. It's that they have a lot more responsibility. And I mean, that should be true. Of course, I don't really think it is. I think they get golden parachutes no matter what happens. So the primary goal of compensation is to attract, retain, and motivate. Okay, so we have to start with the idea of why are we paying people? We're not paying them so they can buy food or rent a house or buy a house or anything like that. I mean, that's the result. They can do whatever they want with their money. They can go to Vegas and gamble it. But the point of why there's a compensation program, why we don't just pick a number and pay people, is that our goal is to attract people through having positive compensation programs, to retain people so they stay with us for a reasonable period of time, and to motivate people to work hard. So there are two elements in compensation. There's direct and indirect. And so direct is any sort of wages or salaries, commissions people get. Make sure you know that word in class. Bonuses, any financial incentives you might get if you sell a certain number of units of product this month, then you get 5% of the company's total sales over the next 3 months, something, as long as it's money. Direct financial payments are money of some kind. Now, the reason you get the money might be different, but it's money. Indirect is things that are not money. So insurance is part of a compensation program. Vacations are part of a compensation program. As I said, we're going to talk about that in the next PPT after this one. But there are all kinds of benefits that are very valuable. Maybe it's a company car, maybe it's a bigger office, maybe it is stock options and gain sharing and things like that. But if you're getting money, that's direct. So that's what we're going to talk about first. And something we'll talk about in class, but I'll just mention it because I think it's critical to understand, is the difference between internal and external equity. But we'll talk about that in class. So let's talk about what defines a compensation program. What is a compensation program? Well, it involves competitive rates. So that's the first thing. If you're paying people much less than the market price, there's got to be other benefits. And lots of companies do, and they have other benefits. One example, a simple one, I went to law school in Hawaii, and they have something called the cost of paradise, which means a lot of jobs in Hawaii pay less than they would in other big cities around America. But people are willing to accept less money because there's an intangible benefit that you live in Hawaii. It's a beautiful place to live. So generally, unless your company has some other intangible benefits, and things like, if Google or Apple or Facebook, if they're startups and they're giving stock, that's not intangible. Stock is tangible. It's not cash. So it's an indirect benefit, because direct means money, and stock is not money. But it is a financial benefit. Other things that are non-financial benefits could be like Hawaii, location, prestige, working for a company that doesn't pay very much but is extremely prestigious. What else could be besides money? Well, we'll talk about it in class. I'll try to think of some other things that would incentivize someone to work at a company even if the salary rates are not competitive. Generally speaking, the first part of any compensation plan is that you have to look at the current labor market for this industry. If it's teaching, if it's sales, if it's software, IT, whatever it is, you look at the current labor market for that industry, and you have to have salaries that are competitive. It has to be internally equitable. So these are the things I was just talking about. Number one is external equity, right? That your job must have equity, which means fairness. It must be fair compared to other jobs in that industry. I don't need to earn the same amount of money as someone who works in robotics, totally different industries. And the second part is that it has to be internally equitable. And what that means is whatever I earn, for example, as a teacher at CIP, should be equitable with other teachers at CIP. It could be more or less based on a lot of factors. Seniority, for one. Let's say I've been here for 2 years and someone else has been here for 12 years. It wouldn't surprise me that their salary was higher. What if I only can speak English, but somebody else can speak French, Russian, Spanish, Portuguese, and English and Chinese. Well, it wouldn't surprise me that their salary is higher. Age, not so much, mostly seniority, ability, demographics. So let's say CIP has 2 campuses. One of them is in Shanghai, and the other one is in Zhujiajiao, which is a small, relatively small little city. It wouldn't surprise me that the teacher, even though it's the same job at the same school, the teacher in Shanghai might earn more, because demographically that is a more expensive place to live. Either way, if I found out that one of my colleagues was earning twice the money I was, I'd be a little upset. Oh, I forgot a covering for my computer again, as I do every single class. Oh, and someone's calling me, but I will not take that call. So, you know, if I found out that one of my coworkers was earning double the money I earn for the same job with the same experience and the same level of skill, well, of course I'd be unhappy, because that would not be an equitable or fair or effective compensation program. I would wonder, why is this person getting more? And although we don't really talk about motivation in this class, that runs afoul of Adams' equity theory, which says that there's almost no amount of money you could be making that if you found out someone else was doing the same job and making more, you wouldn't be upset. It really doesn't matter how much you make. I could make $1 million a year if I found out you made 1.5 million for the exact same job, and you have the same experience and the same everything as me. I'd be unhappy. I would go from ecstatic to make that much money to unhappy in a matter of seconds, just because you're making more and it's not fair. This idea of fairness is so critical to just how humans work psychologically. So you want to be fair in terms of the larger market, that's external equity, and you want to be fair in terms of the organization itself, that's internal equity. Next, you want to look at the level of talent that you're trying to get. So let's say you're doing an internet startup and you're trying to get some of the best programmers in the industry. Well, I mean, if your rates aren't very good, you're not providing a high salary, or you don't have some incredible benefit, then good luck. You know, if you're trying to get people to work in your dry cleaning company to wash clothes, well, okay, that's a different level of talent. You obviously don't need to pay them as much as you would a programmer. Think about the time, cost, and energy that it takes you to make this compensation program. So if you're spending 6 hours a day or 12 hours a week designing your compensation program, that's not an effective compensation program. So the first 4 characteristics, I have a couple more, but the first 4 characteristics are that it has to have external equity, internal equity, it has to consider the kind of person or kind of talent you want, and it can't be too complicated or time-consuming a compensation program. Next ones. So the compensation program must be approved. You can't have a program, when I say you, I mean HR, right? This is HR class. So in HR, we can't design a compensation program that the senior management doesn't approve of. Even if we think these people deserve more money, or the employees are getting too much, or it's crazy, this senior vice president is getting $100,000 a week, and our entry-level IT people, who are the backbone of our company, are getting $1,000 a week. It's crazy. Well, it doesn't matter in the end if that's what senior management wants. Remember, we are staff authority. We have line authority only over other people in the HR department. Next, so the employees have to understand why they get the salary they do. This again goes to the idea of equity. This isn't external or internal, this is procedural equity, that people need to understand why. So if you told me that one of my colleagues is getting double my salary, but my boss Elaine sat down and said, David, the reason is they have a PhD from Harvard, and they recently brought us 6 universities in Spain and France who are going to send students over worth millions of RMB, and they also speak 12 languages, whatever. Okay, then I understand. If I did those things too, I'd be paid that money. But if I don't know this, That's where there's a real problem, because the procedure of how the boss decided to give my coworker more money, that procedure wasn't made clear to me. And that's why it's called procedural equity, because the procedure of choosing who gets how much money needs to be made clear to the employee. And it's often not. We're talking about a very aspirational or idealistic HR program, something that would really be perfect. In most companies, employees don't know. And a lot of bosses will say, please don't discuss your salary with each other, which I think is absolutely crazy. It's just crazy to say that. Yeah, I mean, why would you not be allowed to talk about that? Shouldn't everybody know? What's the big secret? If everything's fair, what's the problem? Unless everything's not fair. So I see that as a big red flag whenever I hear that in an organization. Next, a good compensation program has to motivate people. It can't just be enough money to live. And that it's not just your salary, remember, it also might be bonuses or incentives or commissions. We in HR will design a program. It's not just a number that is your salary each month. That would be very easy to determine. Maybe we just look at all the other players in the industry and we just give something about that, but we're trying to design a whole package that is attractive to people. So they want what we offer, they stay with us, and they're motivated by it. And it should allow for growth. If we start at a salary and you never go up, even if it's a good salary, people will not be motivated. People want to grow and improve and get more money. So in a lot of ways, it makes sense to start with a little bit lower salary and then be willing to add, rather than to start high and never go up. Last four, and this is similar to number 4. We said it can't be too complicated. It can't take too much time or money to create this program. Again, it's got to be easy, but also easy to administer. Not just number 4 was it has to be not too complicated and expensive and time consuming to create. It shouldn't take too long to create this compensation program. Number 9 says it shouldn't take too long to implement this compensation program or administer it. If every month when we need to pay people, it takes us 3 days to have individual conferences with everybody to see if they met their KPI every single month, it's not going to work. KPIs shouldn't be used that way. KPIs are more of a 6 month thing or a 1 year thing. Also, the compensation program should be flexible. We should never have it be too crystallized that it won't change. Things change. Sometimes people decide they want more free time, or they want more freedom of choice over what project they're working on, or they want some sort of benefit like training or something like that, or the possibility of moving to another branch of the company and doing job rotation. If they want those things, then money is not necessarily going to satisfy them. So we do need to have some flexibility. Next, it should be defensible against any sort of legal challenge. So if someone wants to sue us and say, this person is making more because he's a man, this person is making more because of the color of their skin, this person is making more because of who they know, this, whatever sort of, this person is making more because of sexual harassment and they gave in and went on a date with the boss, or, whatever it is, we want to make sure that our compensation program is easy to defend so that there's no legal challenges. Next, we need to have broad ranges, and we'll explain that as we get into the subject of how we decide on salaries. But the point of this is a lot of jobs and organizations, especially when they get bigger than, let's say, 10 or 20 people, they start having a salary range. And instead of saying, okay, welcome to our company, you get $5,000 a month, they would say, welcome to our company, you start in salary range 3. And salary range 3 is from $3,500 to $6,000. So you start, let's say you have a master's degree. So you don't start at the bottom, you start in the middle. We'll start you at $4,500. And if you meet your KPIs in 6 months, we'll move you up to $5,000. Then 1 year after that, you'll get a bonus. You're still in salary range 3. But after a year, you'll get a bonus and you'll move up to 6,000. You're still in salary range 3. And then after 2 years, if you meet your KPIs, you move to salary range 4. Usually it's actually 3, 2, 1. 1 is the highest. But you know, that's the point, is we want to make sure that these ranges have enough room in them for people to grow, so that I could start at 3,500 and my coworker who has a master's could start at 4,500, and someone else who has a master's in 6 years of experience could start at 5,500, but we all just started at this company and we're all in salary range 2. That will make me feel more equitable. Because if I just say to them, hey, how much is your salary? And it's more than mine, but we're doing exactly the same job, I'd say, so what? You have a master's. So who cares? We're doing the same job. Why should I get less money because you went to school for something? We're doing the same job, you know, but if we're just in salary range 2 and that's all I know, then I know they're all in salary range 2. So whatever they earn, I'm going to earn that at some point too. So there's a lot of benefits to using ranges. And finally, we want to make sure that the employees have a sense of confidence that the salary is not arbitrary, which means decided on the whims of the management, that the salary has some sort of scientific basis, and there's a reason that we earn the money we do. Of course, it is going to be subjective, but if I ask, why does this person have a higher salary, and the HR says, well, I don't know, you know, the manager just gave them a higher salary. It's up to the manager. They could do whatever they want. You know, if you have a problem, go work somewhere else. Obviously, that's not going to make me feel confident that this, and again, this goes to the idea of equity, fairness, right? So this is not, well, I guess it's a little bit of procedural fairness. What I would call it is distributive fairness, that the amount of money that is distributed to each person is fair, right? It doesn't have to be the same, it just has to be fair. So really, we have 4 kinds of equity we've looked at: external, internal, procedural, and distributive. And yes, I do expect you to understand and know those and what those mean. Okay. Each organization should also always be looking at their goals. What is the goal of the company? Let's say the goal of CIP is we want to have an entrepreneurial school that encourages people to open their own businesses. Well, then what should the salary and compensation package for us teachers be based on? How happy the students are with our class? How good their grades are? Not if that's not the organization's goal. If the organization's goal is for students to open their own business, well, then part of our salary, whether it's a commission or a bonus or an incentive, but part of our money should probably be tied to that. It would only make sense. That's the kind of thing that would attract a teacher who's interested in entrepreneurial matters. And then if the teacher does help students and the teacher then is making more money, then they would retain the teacher. And I would be excited to help students. And I'd be very motivated to do this because I know I get a salary bump every time I help a student open a business. Look there, you know, that it attracts, retains, and motivates your employee because it's connected to the company's goal. It is aligned, right? Same direction. It's aligned with the company's goal. Also, we already talked last class and the class before about performance evaluations. And so performance evaluations should also be a factor in the compensation. And as we saw in the example of Sweetwater University, it doesn't actually matter if we directly, know why I did this, directly. It doesn't really matter if we, in sign language, I think they do with their pinky, like directly. This is sign language for D. I know that because I can say my name in sign language. So, why am I saying this? So, it doesn't matter if performance evaluations are directly related to salary. It's not like you get a good evaluation, you get a good salary. But the performance evaluation should definitely be a factor because, again, we want to make sure, oh, I can't go backwards. We want to make sure that people's salary is connected to their skills and their work. Okay, a little discussion in class. So part of the compensation is based on the job analysis, which let's get back to that. I said we're going to revisit the job analysis from time to time. And compensation has to do with both the job description, but much less the job specification. We are not paying people based on their personality. That would not really fly legally. If we said you get more money because you're an extrovert, I mean, that's not really fair, right? It's not my fault. I'm an introvert, you're an extrovert, why should you get paid more? That's not that different than saying our skin color is different. You know, our personality is different. That's out of my control. That's like saying our height is different. So you can't really base salary on job specifications. However, job descriptions, their problem? There might be is there a problem? Can you hear me? Oh, I'm going to have to pause this recording because I just heard a bad sound on my headphones. So I will pause here and then stop it and continue, unfortunately. Sorry about this. Okay, well, I think this is working, and I very much hope it is, so I'm not just wasting my time teaching myself HR. But so let's continue talking about job descriptions. So some of the things we need to know, we talked about this before, it was on the midterm, but it's also going to be on the final because this is a cumulative final, so it's everything in the class. So let's revisit this. So job descriptions are talking about the duties and responsibilities of the job, right? Not the personality, that's job specification. So this is important for us to use when we're thinking about compensation. And here's some of the questions we will consider when we're looking at the job description as it relates to compensation. Will the job holder supervise others? So part of your compensation, your salary, has to do with your responsibility for other people. If you are only responsible for yourself, obviously you're going to make less money than if you're responsible for other people. What are your duties? That should be obvious. That really is the nature of a job description. How will you be supervised? So if nobody's watching you and you are supervising yourself, well, maybe you're going to earn a little bit more money because you have obviously higher skills, more organizational ability. You don't need to be supervised. How much supervision do you need? If my boss needs to tell me what to do every single day, I might make less than if my boss gives me an assignment on Monday and I just give it to him finished on Wednesday. How much decision-making authority do you have? Very similar to question 1. All of these questions you see, well, duties are, that's a little different, but the other ones all have to do with responsibility. So remember, we said job description is duties and responsibilities, and here's where we clarify a little bit of what that means. Duties are what you do, the things you do each day. Responsibilities has to do with, do you supervise people? Do you make decisions? Does someone supervise you? How much supervision do you need? And then also, what are the working conditions? Are you working outside? Are you working in a very small room? Are you working at a comfortable desk in a big, nice office? All of this could affect your salary. Other things, skills. What skills are necessary? So this is not what do you do each day. This is what skills do you need. Now, if you really do need a PhD, a medical license, a law degree, an architect degree, whatever you need, these are skills. And it does make sense that you would earn a higher salary or get better compensation if you have developed or attained certain skills. Some of these skills you earn through education, like a PhD, and other skills you learn through practical hands-on experience. If you have 10 years of experience in carpentry, building wooden cabinets and shelves, well, that might be a lot more valuable than 10 years in school reading books about how to build cabinets, right? You might have learned a lot about you could identify a Renaissance cabinet, but could you build one? So skills are not necessarily things you learn in school. Will you train or direct the work of others? Similar to, do you supervise somebody? But again, it's the idea of what are your responsibilities? Even if you're not supervising someone, are you training someone? Or are you watching them and evaluating their work? How and when are you reviewed by the manager? So part of your salary might also have to do with how often are you appraised. So let's say that you have one appraisal per year where your manager just does a very basic graphic rating scale. Now, in that sense, your salary might be somewhat connected to your rating, but it might not be entirely based on that because it's only once per year. However, if you are rated every single week by your manager, every Friday, your manager types out a basic form of how you did this week, well, then your salary might be more based on that because it is much more reflective of your actual performance. It's how you're doing each week. So how and when you're evaluated does have a bearing on your salary decisions. What machines or equipment do you use? There are lots of jobs that will pay you more if you learn to use certain equipment. Any job that requires a truck driving license, which is a special license to drive a large truck, will definitely pay more. Jobs that require you to learn how to drive a forklift or use a compressor or anything like that could definitely pay more. The cost of serious errors. So if you're washing clothes, if you make a serious error, what maybe happens is the clothes get stained. However, if you're fixing airplanes or building schools, if you make a serious mistake, it could cost lives. And so that can also be a factor when we talk about responsibility, that you might have responsibility for making decisions that affect the lives of many people. And you might get paid accordingly because it's very stressful to have that kind of responsibility. I mean, I don't know. Never had a job that would be a life and death job. And finally, which stakeholders will the job holder interact with on a regular basis? So on a regular basis, are you working with CEOs from around the world? Are you working with top scientists? Or are you working with paper delivery companies or coffee delivery companies? And the level of who you interact with has a lot to do with your salary too. Think of the superintendent of a building where they're not interacting with CEOs and scientists, but who they are interacting with is plumbers, electricians, roofing repair, all kinds of construction, people that are absolutely critical. We're talking about apartment buildings where if there's no electricity or water or plumbing problems or sewage problems, people can't live there. And then where do they live? So a super actually does make a good amount of money, a superintendent, because they're interacting with so many people. They have a lot of responsibilities. And it's difficult. A lot of people aren't able to do a job that requires that much communication. So in terms of job descriptions, there can be both generic and specific descriptions. So generic ones are very general, right? A general description, it could be used for several different positions in a university. So for example, teacher, right? Teachers, they get a subject, they read textbooks, they develop a PPT, they present it in class, they create tests. I could be talking about a math teacher, a physics teacher, a Spanish teacher, an English teacher, a law teacher, it doesn't matter, they're all teachers. Or we could have a specific job description, which is really targeting the individual job, not the general position. Okay, what I was going to say, so now we'll do a little exercise in class about writing a job description, but what I was going to say is that job descriptions should pretty much cover the 5 W's, who, what, where, when, why, and any good job description should give information on those, really the 5 W's and 1 H, who, what, where, when, why, and how. So in terms of writing a job description, let's review this because on the final, I do expect you to know all about the job analysis process. So for one, we start with duties and responsibilities, some of the things we just looked at, right? And we do this in logical order. We start, when I say logical order, the order is generally tasks that require the greatest amount of time or the greatest responsibility. So we don't do it by what you do chronologically, what you do first in the morning and then in the afternoon. It's about what do you do that takes the most time or the most responsibility. That's how we're going to organize these duties that people have. We'll make sure we separate this very clearly. We'll try to use very specific language. We don't list every single thing people do. You answer the telephone. If you're a CEO, of course you answer the telephone. If you're a manager, of course you answer the telephone, right? We don't list every task. We do want to include, again, specific examples of duties. We would not say communication. Every job has communication. If we're talking about a manager of advertising, we might talk about communicating time deadlines to small teams about advertisement projects and relaying the status of the project to the stakeholders and the customers, and being able to explain to the customers the storyline, like very specific, which we would, again, in HR, we'd need to interview people to be able to do this. I couldn't just write a job description for a job I've never had. We want to use non-technical language, something that anybody can really understand. We want to indicate the intensity of the duties. How often do they happen? We want to list the duties rather than write a story about them. While we want examples, this isn't a BARS evaluation. This isn't, the customer comes to the office and it's a raining day and the manager comes out and says, would you like a cup of hot tea? And then the manager tells the customer about that's a story. That's not an example. That's much too narrative. Narrative means story. We don't refer to specific people. We don't say part of this job is working with Jim. That might not be true. Jim might leave. We always want to use the present tense. We want to say this job involves talking to customers on a daily basis about the status of ongoing projects, right? It didn't involve, we wouldn't say this job involved talking to customers about how the project was going. We always want to talk in the present, how the project is going. We want to be objective. There's no judgments of whether it's better to be talking to a customer than to be doing data entry. There's no judgment whether it's better to be making coffee or cleaning the bathroom or planning trips to London to work with the government. There's no judgment here. It's just objective, what the job is. We explain what is done rather than the procedures for doing it. So we would say this job involves high levels of coordination between small teams creating 2-week to 2-month advertisement projects, rather than saying the customer will come with a project and we will give it to a team and they will work on the project. That is the procedure. That is the procedure of what happens, but it doesn't really tell me what your duties are. Everything should be job related. Unnecessary grammar, avoid that, and use action words, right? This job involves communication, involves discussion, involves scheduling, right? We want to make sure it's present tense and it is actions, right? Not when people call, one must relay to them the status of projects. That's not really, it doesn't have action to it. It's a very passive voice. We'll do a little activity in class. Okay, now let's talk a little about determining the compensation. There are 4 things. So now we've talked about the introduction to compensation, and now let's talk about 4 things that are directly related to deciding the salaries, pretty much. Women are paid less. Not in every job and not in every country. In China, it's not really true. But these textbooks that we're using were written in America, and America, as I think people are beginning to see, is not necessarily the pinnacle of, equality that people would like to believe it is. So women are sometimes paid less. Pay for male and female managers is lower when the manager's peers or subordinates are mostly female. sort of a terrible fact. Now, what that means is if I'm a manager of a department that is mostly women, or if most of my coworkers at my level are women, or most of my supervisors are women, even the men tend to get paid a little less. This is obviously the pink wall, right? And it's terrible. I do believe it will change over time. I do believe that a lot of the objections to these things are happening right now, during our lives, and this will change in a positive way, but it is something to be aware of in HR. So, as I said, there are 4 things that determine basic pay rates: legal, union, policy, and equity factors. Let's go through these 4. I think we should be able to at least get through all of these in this first part. So first we'll do the legal factors. Now, a lot of this we've learned already. I do expect you to know this stuff going forwards, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time now since we did it in Unit 2, and we'll do a review before the final. So you can always go back and look at your notes. Obviously, the FLSA of 1938 determines whether someone is exempt or non-exempt, and obviously that relates to their salary, because that really says, are they paid hourly, in which case they are non-exempt. They must be under the FLSA, which protects them and gives them things like maximum hours, overtime payments, scheduling, so you can't only work at night or work 12 days in a row. It has a lot of things to protect the workers who really can't protect themselves. Or are you exempt? Are you a professional who could work 12 days in a row, 10 hours a day, because you're paid very, very well to do that? Next is Equal Pay Act, which should equalize between the sexes, men and women. Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, we just call it Title VII, and that says there cannot be discrimination under any protected category, whether it is the color of your skin or your religion or your age, height, weight, opinions, politics, whatever it is, bald or having hair, whatever. And with that goes things like the difference between direct and indirect discrimination, between, what's it called? It's escaping me right now, but the discrimination on purpose versus accidental discrimination, where there's a fair policy for everybody, but it unfairly affects a certain class of people. It'll come to me in a minute. And to also understand the defenses of BFOQ, bona fide occupational qualification, and business necessity. So all of that is under Title VII. You should know what the EEOC is, right? That the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission is, you could say, the teeth of Title VII, right? That is the organization that gives Title VII its power by actually going out and suing people or organizations if there is a claim of discrimination based on, I'm trying to tell my brain, what is it called? It's not overt. Okay. We didn't learn yet about Davis-Bacon or the Walsh-Healey Act. Those are kind of new things for us for consideration. FLSA, we talked about. If you are non-exempt, like you're an hourly worker or you work at a non-professional sort of job, then you're under the FLSA, and it talks about overtime, minimum wage, maximum hours, child labor, stuff like that. If you are exempt, you're an administrative executive, a manager, a professional like an architect, doctor, or lawyer, anything that requires a license, then you are exempt from that. Some other employees are always exempt. Live-in household staff, for example. Can we say that if you have someone who lives with you and takes care of your children, that at 5 o'clock at night they can stop taking care of your children? No, it doesn't work like that. They live there. Or a taxi driver, or for whatever reason, a motion picture, movie theater employees, because they often, well, for them, they have to work at night sometimes. We can't say it's not possible to work at night. Movies are shown at 11 o'clock at night, so they do have to work at night. Generally, no matter what your position in an office, if you're earning less than $23,660 per year, you are non-exempt. You are covered by this act, no matter what your job title is. Your title can be executive manager of everything. It doesn't matter. You're not earning enough money to be considered a professional at that point. Determining exemption, you can look at that on your own. Equal Pay Act, we already talked to. This was about gender, about men and women, that people need to be the same, paid the same for doing equivalent work. It's only possible to pay people differently based on some of the factors I was talking about before, like seniority, time at the job, or different levels of skills or merit, right? If I'm doing wonderfully at the job and I've just signed up all these new customers, and then a woman who is my peer, she didn't sign up any customers for 6 months, well, I mean, it might make sense if I'm getting a bonus because I'm doing a really good job. It's not based on the fact that I'm a man, it's based on my effectiveness. Title VII, we just talked about, no discrimination. Now, Davis-Bacon. So Davis-Bacon, and this is really for America, but there's this idea of a prevailing wage, and that is generally the wage that contractors and subcontractors get paid, whatever the market rate. Let's say I want to build a house, and so I hire a contractor. And of course, the contractor, he's going to hire people. He's going to hire a plumber, or she is going to hire electricians, plumbers, architects, designers, whatever. That's the contractor's job. They don't build the house with their own two hands all the time. They're the manager of the house, and they will build it. Well, for a federally funded job, which means a government job, there was a problem in the 30s that they were getting a lot less money, like tons less. And a lot of people didn't want to work for the government. They wanted to work in the private sector because you'd make a lot more money. And so the government passed this act saying that for a government job, contractors and subcontractors have to pay the prevailing wage. They can pay no less than what others locally pay their workers for similar private projects. So this sort of, and I think most countries do have something that says if you're doing contracting work for the government, you can't really be paid less. Actually, I shouldn't say that. I don't know about most countries. I know most Western countries do. Davis-Bacon applies to contracts that are in excess of $2,000, which is for construction, pretty much all of them. And it includes any kind of construction, alteration, repair of any sort of public building or public works. And it also says that the subcontractor has to display the wage scale so everybody can see how much you make in the range of your job. Very transparent. The Walsh-Healey Act, very similar idea. And the difference was, instead of making sure that for government contracts they paid the same as the private, this wasn't, as the private market, this wasn't about the salary, this was about benefits, like labor rights. So in the 30s, if you were working for a private company, you had certain rights, like the right to form a union, where if you were working for the government, you didn't necessarily have those rights. And so the Walsh-Healey Act said, just like the Davis-Bacon Act, which says the salary needs to be the same, actually the rights need to be the same as well. We learned about some other discrimination laws, age discrimination, the ADA for disabilities, the Family and Medical Leave Act. All of those are all the legal factors. Now, union factors. So there are some factors related to payment that has to do with whether or not you're in a union, but I want to save this discussion for if we have time this semester to do the whole section, the chapter that is on unions. Because remember, HRM is 5 plus 3, right? Recruitment, selection, training, evaluation, compensation, plus health and safety, fairness, and union. So if we have time, we'll get to union. I consider this to be a little bit less important because of how diverse our class is, that I mean, there's only maybe one or two of us from America, but all of our textbooks are coming from America, so they're focused on labor, where we don't necessarily need to. But the idea of labor relations really in this context, talking about money, relates to this idea, what's called collective bargaining, to bargain collectively. And what that generally means, and usually minimum wage is the main issue here, is if you're in a union, the union is going to fight for you and the other people you work with to have a high minimum wage, to have higher basic salaries. And so because of that, jobs that are unionized do tend to have a higher minimum wage or other benefits. Of course, you do have to pay union dues. The union is going to vote on things, so if you don't participate, they could make decisions that you don't like. So there are drawbacks to being in unions too, but it affects compensation in the sense that if you're in a union, there is this collective bargaining, which means all the employees together stand together. Now, the problem of that is if they don't get the salary they want, they could go on strike and you could lose your job potentially. So there are dangers to being in a union, but generally speaking, they do have a higher base salary. And we'll talk about that more if we have time during this semester. Compensation policy factors are quite important. And when we say policy, what we mean is this strategy, right? We talked about strategic HRM in our third unit. And really what that talked about was the hierarchy of goals and the idea of alignment of goals, these aligned goals, that the goals of the organization and the goals of the employees should be in the same direction. And as we said before, this is a characteristic of a good compensation program, is that it should support the employer's goals. And just like my example for CIP, if we want this to be an entrepreneurial school, well, then the compensation policy should support teachers encouraging entrepreneurialism. Then that would attract the teachers who like that, retain the teachers who earn money by doing that, and motivate the teachers to keep doing it and earning more money. And that would be aligned with the goals of the organization. So the organization wants to create a rewards package, which includes the wages, it includes the incentives, it includes the benefits, that brings out the employee behaviors that the company wants, whether it's encouraging entrepreneurialism, encouraging creativity and risk-taking, following the rules strictly and never taking risks, whatever the company wants. They can create a rewards package and compensation program that fits their goal or their objective. So basic factors for policy is this idea of aligning with goals, the idea of making sure there is equity, so there's fairness, and addressing any of those issues about external equity, internal equity, and procedural and distributive equity. What some companies do is they create a reward menu. Now, we talked about the 4x4 matrix at the end of our last subject, where we talked about the fact that evaluating people isn't enough if you don't know their value to the organization. Some people are mission critical, some people are non-essential, some people are core, some people are necessary, some people you could replace easily. We have to have some categories of value to the organization, and that also will determine their compensation. It's not only what score did they get on their evaluation. And part of this is different levels of value to the company might have different menus of what rewards they want. So the traditional compensation method, which I think I talk about soon, but the traditional compensation method was really meant for a family in the 1950s or 40s, which was like a husband, a wife, maybe 2 kids, and a house in the suburbs. So you had a package that included family health care, certain amount of vacation time per year. The expectation was the family has 1 or 2 cars, so there's usually no stipend for that. It's really based on this very old, very antiquated idea of what the family is, where now you have lots of people who are in all kinds of relationships and might have children, might not have children, might be in different kinds of partnerships where they don't necessarily want the traditional rewards package. And so a lot of companies now are coming up with menus that might include money, but also might include things like training or the choice of assignment or maybe the location you work or your time flexibility. There are all kinds of benefits you could earn by getting a good evaluation, having good KPIs and meeting them for your job description, and then you can choose what you want. Next is equity factor. So we already talked about the idea of external and internal, and really that's the key here, is that externally the payment must be similar or comparable to the same job in other industry, the same job in the same industry at other companies. Because if it's not, then people might leave your company and just go to the other company to make more money. So it's got to be similar. And then there also has to be internal equity, which is in the company, two people who are doing the same job relatively can't have widely disparate or different wages, or else they're going to wonder why. Okay, I think that's all I want to say about the 4 factors, and we are just under an hour. So let's stop there on the first video, because this is definitely going to need 1 or maybe even 2 more videos. Like I said, this is 2 weeks that we're going to work on this. So we'll stop here for this video, and I will see you in class.